You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was from a live event, an evening with author Brit Barron at Third Window Brewing Company on Friday, October 25th. In this episode, Brit delivers some insights from her new book, Do You Still Talk to Grandma? And she and I discuss some of the main themes as they relate to our current political climate. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Friends, I think we're going to get started here. I just wanted to say welcome to everybody. Happy Friday. My name's Tim. I'm a curator at Way Collective, which is a community that's hosting this event tonight. If you're curious about who we are, you all have flyers, so I don't need to say too much, but we are a community that meets on Wednesday nights for contemplation and conversation and some food and good time. So we're excited to have Brit Barron with us tonight. Because her new book, Do You Still Talk to Grandma, is wonderful and timely. In fact, there's a little group of us who have been getting together here on Sundays to have a little book club about it. So you're always welcome to join in for the next couple weeks as we finish that up as well. But if you haven't heard of this book yet, just know that the idea behind it is how we can keep connections with people who are difficult in our lives, maybe with people whom we disagree, people who are problematic or see the world in ways that we can't maybe outwardly endorse, and yet they're still a part of our circles in our lives. And so I'm really excited to hear from her. So I'm not going to say too much more right now. I just want to invite Brit up. Let's give Brit a round of applause. We are grateful. Thanks for coming to hang in Santa Barbara. Final stop.
This is it, yeah. This is it. I know.
It's exciting.
This is the, hi. This is the final stop of our book tour that we've been on. So we've been having this conversation all around the country for the past 3 weeks, and it's been fantastic. And I'm so excited to be here tonight. Who got the smash burger? It was so good. It was like crispy and like thin on the edge. That's hard to achieve, right? Anyways, that's not what I'm here to talk about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, some of the makings behind it, some of the things inside of it, and then we'll have some conversation together, if that sounds good. So this is a project I started working on in 2021. And part of the reason that I started thinking about it is I was looking around and just wondering if what we were doing was the best way forward. I say all the time, one of the things that I believe to be true and that I believe in the most is that I want to be a person who exists for liberation. And I started to realize that if everyone is not included, it's not liberation. And so that forced me to sort of ask, what's on the other side of cancel culture? And so as I saw the work and I started to ask if there was a way to, with our own integrity, maintain relationships with people we disagree with, and extend that invitation. And so one of the pivotal things that happened and where the title from the book came is I was at a dinner with a group of friends in 2021. And one of our friends had just gotten back from vacation, and she was talking about going on this family trip with her family to this house that they go. It's her grandparents' house, and they go every year, and it's the same thing, and they, eat cookies every night and have chips for breakfast, and they play all these games and all these memories that exist, and she's telling us this whole story. We're like, oh, great, And then she said, and I found out my grandmother voted for Trump. And we're like, okay, and another friend at the table gasped and said, well, do you still talk to her? And she said, my Nana? Yeah, I do. And I thought, what an interesting conundrum, right? Because we just got all of this information about who this person is, and then one piece of information, and it was as if immediately that single piece of information erased all the other information. And I asked myself, is there a way that they can both be true? Can we hold both deep love and deep disappointment? I say all the time that I set out in this work not to find a way that we could walk up to a stranger on the street who we disagree with and strike up a conversation. But I started doing this work for the ways in the relationships in our life that already have a deep love and a deep connection and hold that deep disappointment. And as I started having those conversations and thinking about that, I realized I don't have a single person in my life for whom that wasn't true. We all have people in our lives for whom we love deeply, and then we also have a deep disappointment. And that ranges beyond politics or religion or ideology, right? That's all kinds of things. And so the question became, can we maintain that connection and our own integrity? And so that was a question driving this book. And I found a few things in the process of writing it, a few barriers. The first thing I found is that one of the most difficult things that we fight against or bump up against in this work is our tendency towards binary thinking, right? Binary thinking is all over the place. It's in our storytelling. It's in, the ways we talk. It's in our news. It's in, social media. It's all over the place, and we are constantly being pushed to believe that there is a line in the sand, and we can find ourselves wholly and fully on the right side of it. So maybe like you in the room, I don't know, but I grew up super religious. I grew up very conservative evangelical. Woo! Wow, no shout outs. And something I joke about is growing up super conservative evangelical, especially in the 90s, okay, when we were really popping off. I sort of existed in this world within a world, and in that world, there were very clean lines, right? It was, here are the books you can read, and here are the words you can say, and here are the things you believe, and here's the music you can listen to, and if you don't do these things, then you can't be in our club, right? And as I left that world and I explored more about my own identity and sexuality, and all of these things became really important to me, I found myself working in the DEI space and in social justice circles. And then I started to hear things like, these are the books you can read, and these are the words you can say, and these are the things you can do, and if you can't be in our club. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's the same root of that thinking that we can draw a line and find ourselves on the right side. That we can arrive, that we can have the right politics, the right ideology, the right theology, the right parenting style, the right marriage tips, the right view of the world, the right global, the right everything, and we just exist fully on the right. And if we can exist fully on the right side of the line, then that means that someone can exist fully on the wrong side of the line. And so I started to really dig into that and realize maybe it's not a line as much as it is a web, right? That we are constantly trying to untangle. There are parts of me that exist in all kinds of places, and that web is constantly evolving, right? So I found myself forced with the idea of, can two things be true? Can I hold more than one thing to be true at the same time? And that's actually work that started long before this book. I remember several years ago I was in therapy. If you're listening, Abby, thank you. But several years ago I was in therapy, and I was working through some issues with my parents. And every time I would say something that disappointed me or something that was frustrating, something I was struggling with my parents, I would immediately say, but they're really good people, like to my therapist. And she would stop me and she'd say, do you think that if you say something that you are disappointed in or that was hard, then they can't also be good parents? And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I feel, right? This need to say it's going to be one or the other, and that if I acknowledge any of the disappointment, then I'm not acknowledging the work that they put in and the ways that they showed up for me. And so sitting in that room and really being like, oh my gosh, so much of our work is to hold multiple things to be true at the same time, right? I talk about in the book being a Black queer woman in America, and I'm like, I literally hate it here. And I love it here. And sometimes one is stronger than the other, and my job is to not reconcile them. My job isn't to say, well, if I'm grateful for it, then I can't critique it, or if I critique it, then I can't be grateful for it. Both are true. I love it here, I hate it here, I just hold that. It's a place I love and have critique for, and that is possible, right? And so how can we do that in navigating our relationships? The second thing I found, there's a term in the book that I call progressive amnesia. And this has deeply impacted myself. And maybe you in the room, no hands necessary, but progressive amnesia is a term I use to describe a phenomenon where we learn something new and then we act as if we've always known it. Yeah. Okay, so this disproportionately affected a lot of us in 2020 when we were like, I just learned that there's racism in the world on Monday, and on Tuesday, I'm a full social justice warrior. And I love that. However, I think a way towards empathy and breaking down that binary thinking requires us to be connected to the version of ourselves that existed before this one. To have empathy and to have nuance and to remember what it felt like before we know what we know now. I think each evolution of myself personally, I've felt more like myself. I'm like, oh, this feels more like me. And so there's a tendency to like distance myself from the versions before, but they are so important. I say all the time, there's a version of me that sat in conservative evangelical churches and like found so much safety and like belonging and beauty in those seats and in those messages and in those words. And so as I look now and I think like, sometimes evangelical conservative Christians like bother me. Okay, am I alone? And it's easy to look and say like, you guys are so wrong. Like you are so missing the mark. You are so off. You are so all these things. And I'm like, are you or are you me 15 years ago? And if you're me 15 years ago, then fundamentally I have a different approach. And something I say all the time is the work never changes. I still am about the work of liberation, but my approach to the work constantly changes when I'm able to hold empathy for all the versions of myself that came before this one. I remember in 2008, same-sex marriage was on the ballot in California. And I'm at a Christian school, okay? Shout out AP, just kidding, I would never. No, but I was at a Christian college, and I'm just at the beginning of expanding so much of my worldview. I am so still in the dark about my own sexuality, right? But the signs were there. Captain of the field hockey team, anyone? And so I'm in the dark about my own sexuality, but I'm starting to have friends who are coming out. But I'm still like entrenched in these ideas, and I have so much conflicting messaging, right? Because I'm like, I love my friends, and I feel like they should be able to get married, but I've heard this narrative about gay people for so long, and what the Bible says, and what God, and I literally stood in that voting booth and almost short-circuited because I didn't know what to do. I was like, I feel like I should vote yes because I want my friends to be able to get married. Well, what if I vote it, and then the rapture comes, and then I'm like, what if I get struck by lightning as I push yes because God's like, see, shouldn't have done that, you know what I mean? And now I'm like, that is in. As I'm like looking at my wife in the back, like, what a beautiful life we have. But that was a real reality for me of like not knowing what to do on something that now I would consider to be common sense. And my distance from that version of myself only creates more distance from, I think, the people in my life who are having that short circuit moment and being like, I don't know, but the Bible, and I'm like, dumb, but I'm like, no, I did that, right? And we have to acknowledge that and be willing to hold that. Something that James Baldwin says is, I imagine the reason people cling so tightly to hate is because they fear once the hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with pain. I think that a lot about why it's so difficult sometimes to change our minds and why it's so difficult to remember a time before now. I think I sit with some of the messages that I spoke in churches when I believed a certain thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I think about the 26-year-old single me who was a pastor at a megachurch who did like marriage counseling, with like, I don't have an MFT. I'm not a licensed psychologist in any way, right? And I'm like giving these people counseling that is probably not helpful, right? Like, oh, your marriage is in trouble. Have you prayed about it? You know what I mean? Like, this is not good advice. And there are painful elements of remembering that, of feeling like I contributed to that. And avoiding that pain does lead to, I think, some of the polarization that is not helping us with what I would consider to be the ultimate goal, which is liberation and for everyone, right? And so how do we connect to that nuance and hold empathy for the versions of ourselves before we know what we know now? One of the stops on the tour, I was talking to this guy, and he was like, I'm about to stop talking to my family because like they won't go vegan, And I was like, yeah, man. I was like, how long have you been vegan? He was like, a year. And I was like, totally. I was like, so 2 years ago, if you remember, you weren't vegan, But he's like, and he's so passionate, and it's like from a good place. He's like, these animals are these sentient beings, and like, he's like really giving it. And this, no shade to everyone at a smash burger. I had a smash burger. I'm not a vegan, but he was just so passionate, and he felt in his core like, how could they not see this? Because I now see it. And I'm like, oh, bro, you have to have empathy and remember that like you didn't always know this or believe this. And so these things that feel like common sense to us and they're so obvious, like we have to remember that we didn't know at one point. And again, that doesn't change the work, it changes our approach to the work, right? The third thing I found, and I actually found 8 things, I'm just not talking through them all, but there's 8 chapters in here. I'm just giving you some top 3 highlights. The third thing I found is I started to wonder what I was really bumping up against when I was talking to people that I disagreed with. And I started to realize that very rarely was I arguing facts. I was arguing against someone's sense of belonging. And so I was watching a documentary one day, and, because I'm just a documentary girl, I'm just an academic at heart. The documentary was called Below Deck. I'm just kidding. No, it really was a documentary. Below Deck, if you're wondering. It's not a documentary. It's trashy reality TV that I love. But I was watching a real documentary. It was about flat earthers, and I just came on after something else, so I started watching it. And so the man making the documentary is at a flat earth conference, and they're in the lobby of a Hilton hotel or something, and he's interviewing people, and he's saying, how could you, believe that the earth is flat? We have pictures of it from the moon, and all the other reasons. I don't know them off the top of my head, but they're there. And then the people would say, it's flat because whatever. And so he's just interviewing these people and going back and forth. And one guy sat down, and I realized, this is it. This encompasses everything that I was trying to pin down as I was thinking through why these conversations are so difficult sometimes. And so he sat down, and the interviewer said, the earth is round, we have pictures from the moon, and other scientific reasons, and they argue a little bit, and then the guy says, listen, it's really hard to make friends. It's been really hard to make friends my whole life. And I became a part of this Facebook group, and we talk all the time. We go to 2 conferences a year, and these are the people who feed my cats when I'm out of town. And I was like, yep, there it is. This man doesn't care what shape the earth is. You could have told him it was a pentagon, triangle. It doesn't even exist. We've been lied to. And he's great. As long as I feel connected to other people and I have a sense of belonging in the world, I will go along with whatever I need to go along with, because what I'm not here for is the facts about the earth. What I'm here for is to connect with people and to have someone who's going to feed my cats when I go out of town. And that felt like the truest thing I had ever experienced. That was my experience sitting in churches long after I had started unraveling some of the ideas of the messages. Why? Because all my friends were there. That was my sense of belonging in the world and my sense of connection. And we as humans would do almost anything for that. And so sometimes as I'm having these conversations with people that I disagree with, I am able to ask in the back of my mind, what would it cost you to agree with me? What would you be giving up to agree with me? Not that I don't think you should or I think it's bad, but what would it cost? Because I understand that it cost me, right? I understand that when I was coming out of the closet and I was in this deeply evangelical space, people came and supported me, and it cost them. And I saw it cost them, and it cost me. Not that it's bad or it's wrong. That's what I wanted to happen, right? That's what I think is good things in the world. But it does cost. And when it costs our sense of belonging, I just have a different kind of empathy and compassion for asking people to change their mind when I know that their sense of belonging is what is at stake, right? My community, the people who feed my cats, who's gonna do these things for me? And that doesn't change the work, again, that I want to see, but there's so much empathy and compassion and experience that. And sometimes I think, leaving the church, I've experienced that, but I still am looking for a sense of belonging. A moment I had that really shook me up was in 2021, which apparently was a big year for me. I remember as we were all awaiting the verdict of George Floyd's murder trial, I remember sitting there and watching the news with my wife, and the verdict came out and it was guilty. And the very first thing I did was grab my phone. I grabbed my phone, I opened Instagram, I opened a post a story, and I'm okay, I need to say something about this. I have to, so I go guilty, praise hand emojis, and then I'm I don't know, should I do this? So then I exit my story and I go to an activist that I follow to see what they're saying, and she's we shouldn't be celebrating, George Floyd should be alive. And I'm no praise hand emojis, just guilty, and I'm but is that good enough? And so I go to another activist that I follow that I like, and she's this isn't justice, this is accountability, they're not the same. And I'm like, oh, okay, so not even guilty. Maybe I'll just do like black and people can like fill in the blank, you know? But then I'm like, I go to another page of an activist I like and she's like, don't let anyone tell you can't celebrate, this is a win. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, praise hands are back, you know? And I did this like back and forth thing until finally I was like, what am I doing? Like, this is how far I've gotten from my own voice because I want to belong so bad to something that's not even real. What I wanted to belong to is like nebulous activist Instagram community people, right? But our sense of belonging runs so deep, and it's only amplified by our experiences on social media. And all of these spaces like are tugging on that string to say like, am I good enough? Am I on the right side of this? Is what I'm saying radical enough? Is the work that I'm doing, you know, the right approach? Do I have the right terminology? Do I have all the right things? Because again, I'm trying to fit on the right side of the line, and that's just not possible, and it's not real, right? And that moment was just such a good reminder to me of how far I've gotten from my own voice, and how easy it was for me to give up my own voice to the authority of obscure people online who I've never actually met and may not even know I exist. We're like completely managing my experience of that time. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. So as I started working through some of how we do this and how we understand this, one of the big things that I like to talk about that I discovered in myself was, how can I discern the difference between power and authority? There are real systems of power in this world. We're about to vote in like 2 weeks to put someone in position, many someones, but one in really big position of power and many someone's in different positions of power in our local authority, and that has a real impact. And then there's authority. And authority is something that I've realized we have the opportunity to have over ourselves or to give away. And I'm constantly in the work of pushing us to have it for ourselves. Every single person in history that I admire understood what it meant to act on their own authority. So if you look at someone like Harriet Tubman, she lived in a time where there was a real position of power that said, here's what's happening. And she, on her own authority, did something different. I don't know if you know this, but Harriet Tubman did not go to her local city council and be like, excuse me, might I have a permit to take some people to freedom, right? That's the system of power that existed. But she said, I'm going to act on what? My own authority, because I believe something different. And all of us have that ability to act on our own authority, and that action may look different from the next person in our news feeds, and that's how it should look. I think our desire to give that authority up takes a little of the pressure off, right? Especially if you're like a recovering church kid like me. Like, it was nice to just have someone get on a stage and tell you, like, here's exactly what you need to do to be a good person. It's no wonder now that I was looking at like people on social media and being like, well, I'll just do what she does. You know, I joke that all my friends left the church, but Brene Brown is their new pastor. You know, because we want that voice, we want that. But the reality is all of us have the ability to keep our own authority or to give it away. There are systems of power, and we will vote, and we will act accordingly, and we will do what we can to make those just and liberating systems of power as much as that is possible in our world. And we always have the opportunity to act on our authority. I think something that breaks my heart is I do feel like our responsibility to places in our life where love exists is one of our greatest responsibilities and joys. And to see so many people in my life feel torn because they don't want to be perceived in a different way by talking and keeping these relationships with people they disagree with just really breaks my heart, right? So I'm like, that's your authority. Do you feel like that is something like you can come to the table with? Do you feel like that's someone you can keep engaging with? That is the only authority you need. You don't need an influencer's like cosign. You don't need a system of power. You don't need all these things. If you feel like that is a person you have deep love for and can come to the table with, then keep coming to the table. No, that's literally it, but that wasn't that wasn't how I was planning on ending. In conclusion, this is my book, and no, I know we're going to keep the conversation going, but I think just if you take anything, that the entire crux of this book is, I think, as I started looking at these things happening in the world and started being like, is they the problem? Are they the problem in social? Like, there ended up being a lot of fingers pointing back and being like, I think it would be nice if everyone else was the problem. And I think a lot of this is actually our own work. And that's maybe not the most encouraging thing, but It is what I found to be true. That's the end. Everyone, Tim.
Hey. So one of the things our community does every week is start a conversation that continues on in all different forms. And so Brit and I are just going to continue the conversation that you just started for a little bit, and then we want to invite you all in as well if you have questions, comments, if you want to kind of keep the dialogue going. So one of the things, I mean, I love a lot of things about the book, but one of the things I love is, and you kind of told the story of like looking at the social media influencers and having to discern your own opinion. But one of the things you also talk about is kind of like how, you bring up a good question I think that I've been thinking about is, do we have moral obligations to people online? You know what I mean? What do you think, like how are you carrying yourself now in your internet presence, and like given what you're learning and kind of all that you're living into, what does that look like for you these days?
Yeah, I think that's hard. I don't know if anyone, like, I've been in a handful of situations where I'm engaging with a lot of strangers on the internet and really asking myself, what is my responsibility to this person, if any? And I think we have to be able to conceptualize the internet for what it is. And the internet is two-dimensional. It's a flat space. I joke that the internet is where nuance goes to die. On the internet, you can draw a straight line from LA to New York. In real life, that's going to be like many twists and turns and undergrounds. And so I think there have been helpful experiences I've had with people on the internet and learning things and being exposed to things. But I think there's also a lot of harm. And so much of my relationship with it now is just managing like my own feelings about it. Sometimes I have like endless capacity to be like, okay, yeah, let's talk, you know? But when I find myself being like, listen, Joy from Kansas, like, if you don't understand this thing, like, maybe go get your brain checked. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, literally, why? Like, I think our biggest responsibility is to the people in our real, three-dimensional, lived, actual lives. And one of the things that I found is I think for a lot of us, it can be easy to export our own emotional labor onto strangers on the internet, right? So I have so many friends for whom like will tear someone apart on Twitter, but like when their uncle makes that super racist joke at Thanksgiving, they're like, right? Because it's easier on the internet. And I think what I'm always pushing people to is like, I believe what is going to make a change and a difference is our ability to be with the people we know and we are with.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that. And I think one of the difficulties in our time is that I think the beautiful invitation about your book is it's about connection, it's about keeping connection, and yet there's also real harm being done in the world, and people's lives are at stake, people's flourishing are at stake. And so, you know, it's like you want to keep relationship, but you don't want to be tolerant of harm. But in the book, you make this really wonderful distinction between offense and harm. Could you like unpack that a little bit so that people see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between harm and offense. And I think what's difficult is sometimes the language that we hear is the most extreme version of everything, right, of either side. And being able to distinguish, like, that was offensive, and yes, language does move to action, and action moves to harm, and all of that is true, and I think being able to separate the two will help us address one before it gets to the other in a different way, right? Yeah. Something I say in the book is like, there's a big difference between, in my opinion, Ellen and Harvey Weinstein, right? You have, and so when we have sort of the same reaction to everything, we say everything is like, everything is this, everything is hard, like everything is, then we're having these reactions and we're actually missing a moment to deal with something that is offensive before it becomes harmful, because we're treating it like such. And something I've been saying a lot on this tour also is because I've gotten feedback of like, how can I have empathy for someone when harm is being done in the world? Like, how can I have empathy for someone when bad things are happening because they believe these things?
Right.
And at the end of the day, I believe empathy is not an endorsement. I think we have a fear that like if you empathize with someone, then you're just saying like, well, I guess it's okay, everything. No, empathy is just bringing humanity into that conversation. You can still like harm, cancel, like all of these things are true, but I am seeing you as an actual human being in this conversation, and empathy does not equal endorsement. Empathy is just our first step into understanding and compassion in a way that I think we actually need if we are inviting folks into liberation.
Love that. Empathy is not an endorsement. Love that. One of the things we actually talked about in our community this week, as we've been having a fall series around very similar themes about really how to stay grounded in compassion amidst a divisive election season, was the differentiation between the what of sort of your core beliefs and the how those actually end up getting done in the world, right? Like a what being something like, every human being has dignity, like you say. But there's so many opinions in a room, I mean, even in this room probably, about how dignity is enfleshed, how liberation comes to be, how freedom, I mean, I kind of talked about how our country, I would say like a pretty broad-reaching, core value that everybody agrees in is freedom. And yet on the left and on the right, that gets done in very different ways. So what have you seen in terms of like how to be empathetic and compassionate toward people's hows, knowing that some of those hows are actually harmful, and also just kind of if you could maybe explain that a little bit for the crew here about the differentiation between the what and the how.
Yeah. So there's a psychologist by the name of Ari Kruglansky, and that's my best bet at how you say that. But he coined a term in the 90s called cognitive closure. Yep. It's a point at which our brains stop taking in information on a decision, and we decide that we have enough information, which in some ways is very helpful because our life is a series of decisions. So when you're crossing the street and you look left, right, and left again, at some point you have to be like, I have the information I need, like I'm not taking in anymore. But on a social landscape, in times of stress and uncertainty, our need for cognitive closure grows, and it only becomes increasingly strong, which is why we want to convince ourselves that we have all the information on any given topic because it's like a sense of psychological safety. And so something that I push for in the book is how do we stay cognitively open? And something that's helpful for me is to say I am cognitively closed on the what, on my primary belief that all human beings are deserving of dignity, right? I'm about the work of liberation. The how, I want to stay open on and genuinely open, right? So something like in my city, I live in Los Angeles. Go Dodgers. And I've never watched a baseball game, but man, do I love that city. Something that is happening a lot, right? We have so many people who don't have homes. We have so many people sleeping on the streets. And I think almost everyone in our city would say, like, we don't want that. Like, no one is in LA being like, yep, this feels right, And then how we address that is like, it couldn't be for, like, we need wraparound services, we need housing first, we need mental services, we need this, we need this, we need this, we need this, and everyone has something. And personally, I want to stay open on how that, and I want to actually hear people, and I want to evolve, and I want to learn new things about it, right? And those kind of situations, I think, are good for us to remind ourselves that we are still growing and evolving, and to stay open on the what, on the how, and find our what, and stay true to it, but to stay open on how that looks.
I mean, I think one of the struggles I have is when people disagree on the what. You know what I mean? There's just all kinds of issues we're facing, from reproductive rights right now to LGBTQ plus rights right now. What do you do when people in your life disagree with you on the what?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you relate?
Yeah. I mean, that's hard. And what I say in the book is disagreeing on the what is the point at which community may be lost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that is such an important thing. And I feel like I very rarely find a person for whom we disagree on the what when I give the conversation room to breathe. And that's really hard. And so I'll have conversations with people, and we'll talk about something like, pro-life is pro-choice, right? And it's easy for me to say, you hate women and everybody, and I don't, and we're done here, And to give that conversation enough room to breathe. And something I've been saying, and my dad used to always say, is the three most important words in the English language are help me understand. And if I can go into a conversation and genuinely seek to understand before I'm understood, it is massively different. But that takes a ton of restraint that I don't always have. But when I do, I have found that the conversation goes really well, and I'm talking to these people, and it's coming down to like, we can agree, like, it's not what I have believed it to be that you hate women, right? Is this deep entrenched idea of your religious upbringing and background, which I understand because I short-circuited in an election booth in 2008. And so when we can get to those things, it really changes that. And something that I've been saying, even to my own dismay, is I think it's true that you are going to have to be the bigger person, because only people who have experienced liberation are the ones who are available to offer it. And so, yeah, does it feel like you are always having to be the bigger person? That's probably accurate, because you are the one who has something to give. You have experienced that liberation and that transformation. And so that gives me a different kind of gentleness with which I try to engage. And I have to be so, like, there's a whole chapter in this book, I don't know if you guys have heard it, but there's a whole chapter in the book about boundaries. And I say one of the strictest boundaries I have in my life is with the news. Like, that is absolutely one of the most strictest, because you will get in my head and have me thinking that everyone who is pro-life hates women, when I can actually have a transformative conversation with someone who is pro-life and feel like I'm actually moving the needle into them understanding why pro-choice is actually pro-life, right? But not if I have 16 sound bites already in my head of like who you are.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I come back to a lot is that there's really good sociological research that basically there needs to be 6 factors in place for somebody to actually change their mind and have it consolidate and actually stay changed. It's everything from like feeling disrupted in your current state of thinking, to having significant insight as to the cause of the disruption, to like, basically seeing somebody else in your life who used to think what you did and actually went a different path, to having, I think the last one that always sits with me is like, that you have to have a community who surrounds you and endorses you moving on from that other way of thinking, which I feel like what keeps most people in that place of being stuck and kind of dealing with that, those moments that you mentioned earlier, is that they don't have, it would mean losing their entire community in order for them to change their mind. Like, where are you seeing people, like these kinds of ideas, or I would say like ideological transformations taking place? Like, where is it in one-on-one personal relationships? Is it in communities? Because it's so hard for somebody to have all those factors in place and be able to move. Like, where are you seeing this happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem is our like perceived sense of urgency. So something I believe is that change never bends itself to our timeline. And I know we have a very important election coming up. And I think when we have a perceived sense of urgency, then everything is heightened. And I think we forget what a long game change is, even for ourselves. Like, I remember, and not even politically, like I can literally remember the first time when we were in a group of friends and one of them was talking about their therapist, and then we were all like, and then like kind of afterwards you're like, okay? And then you're like, hey, how is it? And then, it's maybe 2 or 3 years later before the next person's like dialing up a phone to like call a therapist,
I got
right?
One too,
Yeah, and like, oh my gosh. And then now we're all like, therapy, like, and now everyone's like, yeah, but have you tried mushrooms? Like, you know what I mean? And it just keeps moving, okay? Like, you never arrive. And I'm like, girl, every time I think I'm like, yeah, I'm with it, I'm like, oh, acid. No, I just tried EMDR. But something that I've been talking about is just the reminder of the long game of change. And one of my favorite quotes is that our job is to plant seeds for trees we'll never sit under, right? And so when I think about my life, I am living into a reality that people played the long game for and never got to see. Like, as me and my wife casually walk into City Hall and pick up our marriage licenses, I'm like a black woman casually gonna like walk up and vote. As all of these things are happening, I am living in a life that someone like wanted to see the change of and didn't get to, but still committed to that because they knew it's not about me right now. This is not the only time that exists in history. I'm a part of a larger fabric and network of change, and I'm going to commit to that. Like, I don't believe that all the things I'm working for, I will not like be pressed if I don't see them in my lifetime, because I already don't have that lens. I'm like, what I'm doing is like continuing to water the trees planted before me, planting seeds, and like doing the work that I can. And when I have a sense of urgency of like every single conversation I have, like I need to see it. I'm like, it's a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a self-centeredness of I think our current American culture to be like, yes, and all the work like that I want to see, I must see, and I'm going to see it in the next 2.5 weeks. Actually,
yeah. Well, thanks for saying that, because you took the last question right out of my mouth, because that's where I wanted to go, because that's how you sort of end, and it's just a beautiful, I think.
Spoiler. Just
no,
kidding.
I didn't say end the book. I meant like end our conversation right here. But yeah, no, I mean, like I love that image, because in the same way that we can hold together many things, you talk about holding multiple truths a lot in the book, like I think we have to hold urgency alongside that perspective shift of taking a long view and continuing to plant seeds, you know. Some of them fall in the weeds and things like that. I don't know, somebody said that. So,
yeah.
But let's open it up.
Great.
Does that sound cool? What are you all curious about?
Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.